Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Frances Eyre. I am the chair for the consultation part of this meeting tonight. So welcome to those of you who are in the chamber and those who are at home. Members of the public are advised the meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and the live stream recording will be made publicly available on YouTube and Council's website. Nillumbik Shire Council respectfully acknowledges the Wurundjeri Wurrung people as the traditional owners of the country on which Nillumbik is located, and we value the significance of the Wurundjeri people's history as essential to the unique character of the Shire. We pay tribute to all First Nations people living here in Nillumbik, give respect to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all First Nations people. We respect the enduring strength of the Wurundjeri Wurrung and acknowledge the ongoing impacts of past trauma and injustices from European invasion, massacres and genocide committed against First Nations people. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Wurundjeri Wurrung people hold a deep and ongoing connection to this place. We value the distinctive place of our First Nations people both in Nillumbik and Australians' identity. From their cultural heritage and care of the land and waterways, to ongoing contributions in many fields including academia, agriculture, art, economics, law, sport and politics. We have an apology from Councillor Karen Egan. Councillor Duffy?
Yes. I'd just like to make a recommendation that the apology from Councillor Karen Egan be noted.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Thanks, Councillor Ramcharan. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Councillors, is there any conflicts of interest with the items tonight? No, I just remind you that should a conflict arise, that you mention it before the item. I have confirmation of minutes. Councillor Ramcharan.
Yes, I'd like to move that the committee, acting under delegation from Council, confirms the minutes of the Planning and Consultation Committee meeting held on Tuesday the 8th of November 2022 as per Attachment 1.
Thank you, Mayor. Do I have a seconder for the motion? Thank you, Councillor Duffy. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We'll now move to consultation matters. And the item that we'll be looking at tonight is the draft Neighbourhood Character Strategy outcomes of Phase 2 engagement. But before we put the motion to the vote, we have some speakers tonight. And let me just find the list. We have 10 speakers tonight. We have, and you will be presenting in this order as well, Jim Connor, Graham Fadaz, Tim Phillips, Carlotta Quinlan, and then Carlotta Quinlan on behalf of Eltham Community Action Group, Teresa Dominic on behalf of Bram Street Co-Housing Group, Kathy Armour, Sue Dyatt, Janet Davies and Michael Dove. So I'd like to ask the first speaker to come forward to the centre. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, councillors. This is my personal submission and not on behalf of any organisation. Designing and siting of new dwellings to respect neighbourhood character is a fundamental objective of the development provisions in planning schemes. Establishing a strong descriptive base for the neighbourhood character of each area is a significant responsibility of council on behalf of its communities. The protection of the neighbourhood character of each area needs to be very clear and enforceable, particularly to deter overdevelopment. Many submissions tonight highlight that there needs to be more precise wording that is clear and unambiguous. It is critical the preferred character statement and neighbourhood character objectives are given the necessary statutory weight within the overall planning process to be able to stand up in any VCAT challenges. In respect of the draft garden residential area where we live, I'm not comfortable with the following draft objective, which says reflects the preferred built form characterised by predominantly 1 to 2 storey dwellings with a mixture of architectural styles. How is the word predominantly to be interpreted, which could enable higher multi-level residential buildings to be constructed? Again, the design guidelines, building height and form, encourages acceptance of the development of 1 to 2 storey buildings, which does not conform with the draft preferred character statement of built form reflects the low-scale dwellings. I support that buildings should follow the topography of the land. Under the current planning scheme requirements, Council NVCAT approved a multi-level residential development next to us in Eltham that does not follow the topography of the land. It has low-scale dwellings on either side, but the floor level adjacent to and above our dividing fence is 2.4 metres above our ground level and is at our eave level. It totally overshadows our property, particularly our private open space, and consistently undermines our residential amenity. It is imperative Council undertake whatever changes are required to schedules and zones to ensure necessary variations to RESCO requirements, so it is clear what is required that will not be varied. Accordingly, I support the statement in the draft strategy that design guidelines that are to be translated into a zone schedule to vary RESCO standards should be enhanced by including specific details of the schedule changes, that is permeability, site coverage, front and side setbacks. Thanks for the opportunity to present tonight.
Thank you, Jim. Do any councillors have questions for Jim Connor? Thank you, Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Jim, for your comments there, and thank you for giving the example where you were talking about more precise wording and things not being ambiguous in the document. You gave an example of predominantly 1 to 2 storey. Are there other examples of wording in your view that we should be considering?
Well, I think if you look through some of the submissions tonight, there are very clear examples of wording and things like has been suggested that change some of the wordings that should or could to words like will and must, so that very, very clear what is expected. Many of the community individuals and groups have gone to VCAT and have been cleaned out by the vagary of some of the terminology that's within the current scheme. And the planners themselves, council planners themselves, are stuck with that as well, and it's very hard for them to take a strong position against it when there is experienced developers and their consultants know how to work around that.
Thank you.
Councillor Ramshaw, did you have a question? No? If there's no more questions,
Good.
thank
Thanks
you
very
for
much.
coming tonight. We've got Graham. Oh, you're presenting for Graham. Thank you. What's your name?
Tim Phillips.
Tim Phillips, yes.
I'll first read Graham's. This is from Graham and Pauline Files. We live in the Woodridge estate area of Eltham, which consists of treed landscapes. Currently, there's a calming blend of open dwelling styles nestled within the tree canopy. Bush garden or semi-bush garden precincts encourage the visual dominance of native vegetation that reinforces a bushland character. In many areas, however, especially on hillside sites, this dominance often gives way to the reverse, a dominance of structure, despite attempts to disguise this with immature plantings. Buildings must not dominate the landscape. Maintaining and enhancing the tree canopy across all these areas must be a priority, along with softer, non-dominant treescapes and openness of front boundaries. New developments must not be at the expense of tree removal. Compulsory plantings of immature trees are insufficient to maintain existing neighbourhood character. Much greater strength and weight must be brought to bear on this. Significant improvements are required to the weight of that the neighbourhood character has within the Nellenbick planning scheme. Whilst we live in a Bush Garden 1 precinct in Eltham Woods, Woodridge area of Eltham, it is concerning that the potential for overdevelopment exists over many sites across all areas of Eltham. Single dwelling knockdowns in favour of multi-unit developments appear to pay little heed to existing neighbourhood character. Rather, they focus on achieving maximum site coverage and minimal garden area. We're not in a major growth corridor, and therefore the preferred emerging neighbourhood character of the area should encourage the retention of substantial native trees, ensure mandatory compensatory plantings are significant and maintainable, even on council reserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, on behalf of Graham. We cannot ask you questions for Graham, so we'll have you start yours. You've got 3 minutes. Thank you.
Sure. I speak on support of the neighbourhood character strategy process, but with 2 qualifications as examples. There's many more, but only time for 2. Clearly, one of them is clearly this document sits within a suite of strategy documents within the council, with influences every which way between those documents. And I ask rhetoric questions here because reading the documents, they came up, and I can't get an answer tonight, but I put them out. How has, for example, this document connected and informed or been informed by, for example, biodiversity planning? And that would be another strategic area for council. The neighbourhood character strategy through planning would be one of the most significant influences on tree canopy and therefore on biodiversity. So they really connect, and they really need to be considered in tandem. I know there's a contract for this neighbourhood character strategy, but it will have spin-off directives that might connect to other strategies, and I don't know that that's being done. It's not communicated in the strategy that's done. The linkages, some of the documents are listed, but not how they're linked. Another example related, with the current significant landscape overlay scheme, like the SLO2 for example, do the character type maps marry well together, and if not, why not? And what are the implications for the significant landscape overlay from the neighbourhood character strategy? There'll be bush residential areas, and how they marry up, I don't know. At VCAT, you go and you present SLO boundary maps, and they're significant, they're taking a lot of weight. But if the neighbourhood character railroads those, that's going to be a challenge. The next point really relates to some frustrations. Clearly this document will help in planning application process in council and at VCAT, but there needs to be an appreciation that the threats, and some of these were identified in the initial consultation, are actually managed, because otherwise you have a sort of a toothless tiger document coming out of this process, and that would be sad. Some of those challenges, and we all know them very well, the bushfire regulations unnecessarily used to clear trees, clearing of trees by some developers as a business expense, that's if they get fined, for example, and the proof for VCAT for clearing for developer advantage seems very difficult. Another example of a sort of point that relates to this threat.
I'm sorry to do this to you, Tim, but you've gone over your 3 minutes.
Following tree removal, some applicants put in their planning application. So there's, several examples of why it's a challenging area to be in. And just recently I've been to VCAT, talking about some of those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Do I have any questions from councillors? Okay then. Have you got a question? Yes.
It was just a question through the chair. I'm just wondering whether officers might be able to give us an indication to answer Tim's question about do the zones in the neighbourhood character strategy match the SLOs or other zones so that the boundaries match up. I haven't done that exercise myself. It might not be something that can be answered today, but I just thought I'd ask.
Through the chair, I can answer. The SLOs don't necessarily have to match the boundaries of the precincts identified by the character strategy. They're very different tools. We will be looking at the SLOs and all the overlays and indeed the zone and its schedules to determine how to best implement the strategy once it's done and adopted to ensure that it's effective as much as possible.
I was aware that they weren't exact, they're slightly different criteria, but they will feed
Sorry,
each
Tim,
other.
you're actually not allowed to address.
Okay. All right,
Yeah,
I tried.
you did try. Good try. All right. If there's no other questions, thank you. We'll move on to Carlotta Quinlan. And you're speaking on behalf of yourself first? On behalf of Eltham Community Action Group first? Sure, no worries. Thank you. You've got 3 minutes.
Yes. Thanks for the opportunity to speak tonight. After reading Eltham Community Action Group's submission tonight, it was 8 pages long, and that doesn't fit into 3 minutes, so this will probably sound fairly scrappy to use a word, because you just can't do it justice in 3 minutes. It was impressive to read that there were 332 written submissions for round 1 consultation, but a bit disappointing that only 26 written submissions and 82 surveys were received for round 2. If time permits, I'd like to elaborate on some ECAG observations on why that might be so, but I'll press on. We're also pleased to see that the main key feedback areas in the submission were ones that ECAG had referred to and agreed with their comments on the whole. The others, strength of the document, strength of the wording of the document, development and density, and trees and vegetation. The main comments and concerns in stage 2 seem to tally well with those from the the larger group who responded to stage 1, which was good to see. From ECAG's perspective, and from many interactions with developers and VCAT, clarity and strength of wording is important, and we saw this as a failing in the draft, as I just heard Jim Connor comment on. We also saw the use or definition of preferred character on page 52, and the relationship between the character strategy and the housing strategy as suggested to be a potential problem. It highlights the importance of having a strong neighbourhood character strategy. It's important that a strong neighbourhood character strategy is included in the planning scheme in whatever way will give it the greatest weight in protecting our area. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlotta.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
Speaking for myself, and I agree with the comments made by Eltham Community Action Group. Really, the choice of words in the document and the important areas of the neighbourhood character. Some descriptions of current areas that I know well, for example, between Bible Street and Main Road, contain some mistakes which were noted. Hopefully, if there were if there were any in other areas, they've also been noted and corrected. The importance of that, I feel, is, well, it is important in that the preferred character or the character of the future will obviously is dependent to some extent on the existing character, so to have it correct in the first place is important. A small area between the west of Meatery Road, so on the main road side of Meatery Road, Mount Pleasant Road and Eltham Primary School, I feel will be a better fit for bush residential 2 or 1. They're large blocks, many enormous trees. The historic 1800s cottage, I think the first house of the first principal of Eltham Primary School. And it just seems a better fit than the garden residential of the areas between Bible and Main Road. Also, the area east of Meatery Road, between Dalton Street and Mount Pleasant Road, also would seem to be, and if you look at the plans, it would seem to be a better fit with the pale grey, which I think is garden residential or bush residential 2 or 1, I'm not sure. Either of those, the light green or the dark green, as the rest of that area east of Bible Street is that pale green residential zone. The colour palettes, I think that's really important, that we have earthy tones, not pale tones, which can be Hampton style, which we find everywhere. The cover photo I took dislike to, being autumn leaves. That's not what we're trying to get across when you read the strategy. We're not getting across that the main photo for Nillumbik is autumn leaves. We do have some, yes, and they're beautiful. I have some in the backyard. But, I don't think it should be on the front page of the neighbour character study. So I look forward to seeing the draft doc when it's out, after the feedback's been incorporated, and again making comment. Thank you.
Oh, I was just about to stop you there,
Yes,
so
I saw
lucky.
it.
Thank you. Is there any questions of Carlotta? Thanks, Councillor Payne.
What sort of leaves should we have on the opening colour? What sort of photo should we have, do you think? What sort of trees should be featured?
I would say Indigenous tree canopy. When you go look around Eltham, you don't see autumn leaves everywhere. It did look like Vermont or somewhere.
Thanks, Councillor Payne. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. I've got a question for you, Carlotta. Thank you for your words, and thank you for speaking on behalf of ECAG there as well. You mentioned some descriptions where you thought the areas contained mistakes, so thank you for pointing those out. And you also highlighted the importance of colour palettes. So my question is, you were saying you preferred to see earthy tones. Is that something that you'd like to see across the Shire in this area that we're looking at with our urban areas, or specifically just to the Eltham area?
Well, personally, I would say across the Shire. I guess different areas are up to, it's up to them to say. Peter Martin liked earthy tones in Diamond Creek. Good. Yeah. So Diamond Creek too would be, yes, most good. Beige, that's earthy, muted. Yeah, definitely. It's just recently at VCAT you see so many. They're all greys, they're pale grey, they're slightly darker grey, they're monument, really dark grey. And yeah, if you look at, muted, well, I guess they're muted, but they're Hampton style and they're everywhere, and they really don't fit in with the earthy sort of Eltham Nillumbik feel, I would say. Thanks.
Thanks, Carlotta. Is there any other questions? Okay then, thank you so much. I've got Teresa Dominic on behalf of Bram Street Co-housing. Thank you for coming in tonight. And it's on. You've got 3 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'm Teresa Dominic, and as you've mentioned, I'm speaking on behalf of Broome Street Eltham Co-housing Community, and Ross, a fellow community member, is also present. Personally, I have 30 years experience in local government planning and environment. My last position was the Director of Planning and Environment in Manningham, so I have lots of experience with this topic. Though I do actually have a very active professional and personal interest in co-housing, and that's been for the last decade. At the core of our submission is how a sense of community contributes to health and well-being and a sense of belonging. And we have an appendix to our submission 1 and 2, which outlines a lot of those values. We don't believe that these elements are clearly recognised and identified in the objectives and design guidelines in a manner that will lead to changes in the planning scheme, which will be the next step in the process, and ultimately in enhancing the neighbourhood character of Nillumbik. The ability to promote and support these need to be reflected in the assessment tools and the statutory tools that the planners use to give advice and assess developments. And some of your speakers have highlighted how important that is, especially when you end up in VCAT. Co-housing refers to a community of people who intentionally live together and share some resources while also maintaining independent lives. It has the ability to not only provide greater housing diversity, which cuts across other strategies you have, but also to deliver more affordable options, which we feel is important in the current climate, and create livable neighbourhoods and sustainable and resilient communities. The market failure of the current housing delivery options is not only denying property owners for an increasing section of the population, but it's also not delivering neighbourhood character and community and livability outcomes that are sought by the wider community. And the engagement process in Nillumbik certainly outlined that strongly. Neighbourhood character design elements need to ensure built form outcomes that promote or at least don't hinder social interaction, a sense of place, caring for land, ageing in place, sharing of facilities and utilities, and eco-friendly living. They need to be more than just token efforts of housing diversity. We suggest not enough direction is provided for assessing how these will be translated into planning scheme controls. Design guidelines are required to give specific guidance and proactive support for these to occur. Their physical expression, and I know that's quite difficult, but in terms of looking at social, that is the core of neighbourhoods. And yes, it has a physical expression that people can recognise, but the social elements also promote those. So it's important that efforts are made. And I think your health and wellbeing plan has a wealth of information to assist with that. Co-housing developments are a form of housing that create a sense of community through design, physical design. And
I'm sorry you've gone over time. I'm not doing very good at tracking this. I was writing notes, so everyone's gotten away with a few extra seconds. So,
okay, sorry, I was just going to give you 3 examples, but they are in our submission.
Okay,
We've
thank
given
you so much.
specific examples of design elements that need to be reinforced. And we look forward to engaging further in this important process.
Thanks, Teresa. Was there any questions from councillors?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Duffy.
Teresa, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for what you and the others that are living in the Broome Street area are doing with giving us a real example of co-housing and the benefits of that. You mentioned a number of things in your speech there. I've got a couple of questions. You were saying specifically more directions were required, and I'm wondering if it's something that you would be able to give us a couple of examples of what are the specific directions that you're wanting, or is that more in your, is that something that's easy to be able to give us now?
That's what I didn't realise my 3 minutes was up. Certainly at the core of co-housing is a concept of keeping cars to the periphery. So when you reduce vehicular circulation across a site, you have fewer hard surfaces, You give the opportunity to retain and put in more vegetation, which is really what neighbourhoods want. You increase social interaction and you provide safety, especially for children, but for all people. It also encourages people to do active travel and that you can have car sharing. So that's a very specific example that often is not keenly supported or made difficult. And then another example is shared indoor and outdoor facilities, which do the same things. They help with affordability, as does the first example, in terms of creating opportunities to share workshop areas, to share garden sheds, to have environmental waste minimisation programs, and to look at then how you can do bulk buying. So they all lead to affordability, but they have to have physical elements to be able to manifest them. Similarly with outdoor spaces, normally, because we're talking in townhouse situations, you have quite a small space, but if you've got communal, you can do play spaces for kids, you can have bigger spaces for people to meet. And also you can actually have shared water and energy infrastructure across sites. So there's sort of three examples that are quite physical manifestations that are needed to really help that neighbourhood flourish.
Thank you for that, Teresa. So any other questions? In fact, you were speaking on behalf of Brown Street Co-housing. You weren't supposed to be asked any questions. I'm really doing a good job tonight. That's okay, but thank you for coming. I've got Kathy Armour. And Kathy's, you're speaking on behalf of yourself, so questions can be asked of you, and I'll keep track of time, so thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity and for the hard work you do in your important roles. It takes a lot for me to do something like this, but I'm speaking up in response to my submission because I believe this is an issue that will impact the wellbeing of residents for many years to come. I believe that Eltham can enhance its character not only for residents but make it a designation for people to access, especially by train. And the document includes some positive things like your document, the green spaces and planting and limitations for buildings, which is really good. But like the last speaker, I feel that it could use some more information about why we want these things, about what the purpose is, and would it underpin a bigger vision? For example, if we had the railway station as the centre, and in my paper I've suggested the use of a mud brick, something truly unique that's out here that people can arrive at Eltham and go, wow, this is really cool, and open a gateway to being able to walk or cycle, which is very unique to many coffee shops, to Edendale Farm, the Adventure Playground, the Library Gallery, which is also mud brick, the Miniature Railway, river walks, and with some minor works to the Butterfly Reserve and Munsell Vat. Also to the Leisure Centre, and people can do longer bike rides to Diamond Creek Labyrinth and Playground, which is amazing, and Hurst Bridge with the flexibility of riding back or training back. There is just so much to do from that one place of station. So how amazing to make that a welcoming hub to both residents when they're coming back home and to people that are guests to our community, to this amazing green space that we have. Even amazing ways to get to things like our jazz festival. How can we make the experience of getting off the train a wonderful experience with really well thought of landscape gardens, native gardens? What a great day out for a family or someone to be able to do those walks or rides and go to those places. This, along with the addition of more trees, more mud brick buildings that are developed in the future, and not allowing fence-to-fence development on blocks, are also paramount to improving our character for residents. Let's go for a plan that's based on the well-being of residents and visitors, which would be a state-of-the-art plan that could make us leaders in environmental concerns, education, for example, preserving habitat for the copper butterfly, Indigenous education, research that speaks to the benefit of green spaces. There is there is research, and there is also evidence of benefits to volunteering as well. Our character could be defined not just with the surroundings, but the people who live here. Those willing to volunteer from a range of community groups with a range of
Kathy,
skills.
you've reached your 3 minutes.
So in conclusion, we could make something that we are really proud of, and that would be amazing.
Thank you so
Thanks
much.
for your time.
Was there any questions, Kathy? Okay then, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've now got Sue Dyatt.
I feel as though some of my comments will be duplicated. Bear with me, because it just must mean that they're important if more than one person is saying them. I am not picking particular suburbs or areas, because I think the comments that I'm making are common and generic over a number of Eltham and Nillumbik neighbourhoods with overlapping characteristics. Yes, when we think of Eltham, we think trees and the canopy they offer. And if we do that, then the buildings are relatively secondary. The built forms and colours underneath are still important, but they are in fact secondary to the appearance, the trees are the canopy. Now, when the trees and the canopy are disappearing with subdivisions, then the buildings themselves become more obvious, and we need to be careful in all documentation that the constant theme is apparent. In the drafts, the words muted and the words natural and the words subdued appear in some of them, on some of the areas, but not in all of them. And they appear in all 3 combinations of the words. Some get two words, some get all 3. There needs to be a constant of what we value, and that is built form that is secondary in its appearance to the neighbourhood. It enhances the neighbourhood. The colours are not quite uniform because we're talking about natural colours, but we do need to have the same constraints in all areas. I'm glad you like brown. That's good. That's good. That's fine. The other things that are important is that it gives some security to the planners if there is constants, constant words that can be lent back on as saying, no, that is not correct because we have said it's not preferred, it is the colour. And if you've got a big enough palette of colours, you can say that's not there. And that then leads into compliance issues. You need to have compliance. When you're at VCAT, everything needs to be precise. We need appropriate front boundaries. I've run out of time.
You've run out of time, yeah.
That's all right.
But thank you. And councillors are able to ask questions. Is there any questions of Sue? Thank you, Councillor Payne.
Tell us about the other appropriate boundaries that we need to look at.
Thank you very much, Councillor Payne. On boundaries at the moment, we're getting a proliferation of stark white picket fences in certain areas. I know that the painting industry is producing very strong whites and very strong blacks. I sometimes think when I'm going down Bible Street, I'd love for a dust storm to come. But that's what I'm saying. we need to be careful of fashions that are brought about either by development of paints or development of plastic fencing. Those are the things that I think we need to have an opinion on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for being so passionate about where we live. You were talking about being specific with our wording and things that were in the draft that
Yes.
are not here in this next iteration. Muted, natural, subdued. Would you like to see that across all areas for consistency across the Shire as well in this urban area?
If you can, possibly the word natural needs to encompass soils and that sort of thing. But
So
I would not be upset if because the range of colours in the natural world is enormous.
So would you like us to take out the option to have white as a house colour?
That's very
Yep.
game.
Yep.
In reality, it wouldn't happen, but you could talk about a subdued white rather than these almost day-glow whites that are cropping up.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right, we've got Janice Davies. You've also got 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Just to clarify, I'm actually from the Warrandyte Community Association, but so I did put in the survey submission, whatever it was, but we did it as part of the Warrandyte Community Association. So is that going to confuse things?
So are you speaking on your behalf or on behalf of your community group?
I'm speaking on behalf of the community group.
Okay, sure. That will mean no questions at the end though. Thank you.
That's fine. So my focus is on North Warrandyte Bush Residential 1 zoning. Our concerns, one of our concerns is the bushfire management overlay, which sanctions the removal of vegetation, especially for new builds and new owners. The WCA, while understanding how important this was after the 2009 bushfires, is concerned that it is misused and perhaps too restrictive. We support the reference in the guidelines to strengthening vegetation retention and deep soil, so important for vertebrates, burrowing frogs and so on. But we're concerned that planning applications and arborist reports often focus on the large trees on sites, ignoring the irreplaceable vegetation that includes lichen, moss, creepers, bushes and so on. The latter are essential for biodiversity. Some arborists rate the vegetation as disturbed or low on the basis of one visit rather than looking at all seasons. With respect to site coverage rules, we note that the guidelines recommend that no more than 40% of a block is covered by buildings. There is no reference to site size. There are still some very large blocks in North Warrandyte, and with a 40% dwelling coverage, there would be significant vegetation loss, and that's before the application of the BMO. With respect to fencing, we support no fencing or minimal fencing with low visual impact. Fencing restricts animal movement and destroys bushland views and streetscape. Where necessary for pets or noise abatement on main roads, fences should be set back. Fences can be located at the rear of buildings or around the buildings to control animals, but not necessarily on the fence lines. With respect to siting and scale, we support the guideline regarding developments below the ridgeline rather than on the ridgeline. Dwellings are often sited to give 360-degree views for the owners and consequent loss of bushland aspect or vistas for everyone else, and this is particularly so in Warrandyte. Any development needs to take account of this terrain. A related issue is building bulk, and we support single-storey, smaller dwellings set into hillsides, maintaining the natural vista. Car storage is also an issue in North Warrandyte. People see the large blocks as ideal for multi-vehicle storage, with often more than 10 vehicles on a block. This affects runoff and drainage and leads to vegetation removal and loss of habitat. To accommodate a large number of vehicles, owners build large concrete driveways and erect large sheds. This destroys vegetation and erodes neighbourhood character. A related issue is permanent parking on the narrow winding roads. leading to loss of vegetation on verges, safety issues and loss of neighbourhood character. While we understand the reasons for the many vehicles at some sites, we believe that they should be accommodated on site. And to finish, implementation. We support the design guidelines in relation to the Bush Residential 1, but have concerns regarding implementation. For example, in the guidelines regarding gardens and landscaping, we see prepare a landscape plan for new dwellings, but who checks on whether this has been implemented?
Well done. Thank you for that.
Okay.
We can't ask you
No,
any
that's fine.
questions. Thanks, Janice. And our last speaker tonight is Michael Dove, or presenter. Thank you. And councillors have received something via email from you, just letting you know.
Okay, good, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to present. I'm presenting on behalf of myself, and it's not my intention really to repeat the details that were in the submission. Really tonight what I'd just like to do is to emphasise three aspects that I think they relate to Bush Residential 1, which is the area in which my residence has been classified. It's in research and it's close to Yarramie Reserve. I think it's appropriately classified, and I feel passionate about the protection and the slowing down really of the degradation of the neighbourhood quality in that neighbourhood. Okay, the three aspects I'd like to emphasise. Lawns and non-native and non-indigenous plantings have no place in Bush Residential 1. Avoiding incompatible vegetation must be a condition of planning permits for new properties and renovations and be enforced. I think it's a message which I think other people have also said. At the very least, this must be enforced on council-owned nature strips in Bush Residential 1, and steps must be taken to restore native indigenous species where they have been cleared or replaced. Some of the photos which I've shared with you indicate the way in which I think council-owned land is also subject to the degradation of Bush Residential 1 neighbourhood character. Council-owned nature strips are commonly used for car parking, temporary storage of building materials, including mulch for excessive periods of time. It's also common for home improvement signage, companies, commercial signage, to be present for much longer than is necessary. I appreciate sometimes it's necessary to help contractors find where they need to work, but they're often there more than a year after the relevant work has been completed. This is inappropriate in Bush Residential 1 neighbourhoods and should be reflected in the document. Apart from minimum compliance with bush management mitigation, residents should be prevented from removing mature trees that form an important part of the tree canopy. Remnant vegetation in Bush Residential 1 should be preserved. For example, it's not appropriate to remove excessive remnant vegetation for the installation of swimming pools or tennis courts unless council-approved plans specify minimal removal and that any removal is offset by compatible replacement, and preferably not by immature trees, again underlying a previous contribution. I support the guidelines for a density guide for Indigenous and native canopy trees, but I think it should be strengthened. I have submitted, as indicated, some illustrations which are showing examples like agapanthus, which is an environmental weed regularly planted in Bush Residential 1 areas and on council-owned nature strips, and I believe that's a problem.
Thank you for that. You've come to your end of your 3 minutes.
Thank you, that's fine.
Thank you. Is there any questions from councillors? Thanks, Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. I've got a question about the way that this will all work together once we have this neighbourhood character strategy in place, and you've just touched on things that don't fit into Bush Residential 1, like the agapanthus. What do you see the next step in implementing this would be? Would it be for council to say in Bush Residential 1 where those invasive species are, that we make more of an effort to eradicate them? So if you do have agapanthus as an example, that, like the one that you raised, that we encourage residents and council to remove them all? Like, I'm just trying to
It's
work
just
out
gonna
the
be-
practicalities of the next step with this.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is, from a practical point of view, to retrofit to what should be desired is largely impractical. I accept that. But certainly there should be very specific and stronger statements. Again, we've heard it from others as well. There are too many shoulds in the document and not enough musts. And I think that to be able to manage going forward is going to become increasingly difficult, although I certainly accept the impracticality of retrofitting back to a desired state.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? No. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next part of our meeting, which is the recommendation for the draft neighbourhood character strategy. Councillor Payne.
I am happy to move the motion. The recommendation is that the committee, acting under delegation from Council, 1, notes the public responses as outlined in this report to the Phase 2 engagement for the Draft Neighbourhood Character Strategy, or NCS, and 2, resolves that the confidential unredacted copies of written submissions and survey responses to the Phase 2 public engagement of the draft NCS, as at attachments 2 and 3, remain confidential on the grounds specified in the definition of confidential information in Section 3(1)(f) of the Local Government Act 2020.
Thank you, Councillor Payne.
Oh, 2 more points.
Two
3,
more points.
rights to all respondents to the public engagement to express Council's gratitude for their contribution and to advise them of the committee's resolution and the next steps in the project on the updated Participate Nillumbik page. And 4, notes officers will bring an updated draft of the NCS to a Council meeting in mid-2023 to seek Council's approval to undertake a 3rd round of public engagement on the draft NCS as updated as an outcome of the Phase 2 engagement.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for this motion?
I'm happy to second that.
Thanks, Councillor Duffy. Councillor Payne, do you wish to speak?
Yes, please. Just to thank council officers for their work, along with the consultants who have put the work together for the NCS. It's a huge body of work. We are halfway through the stages. The first was to champion, to bring it to the community. The second is the phase now, which is to test that with the community. The third is to close the loop, to come back with a reworded version, and finally to bring the amendment to council as the final neighbourhood character strategy as a separate project. I just want to also thank the community for their interest and input and feedback, and including those in the chamber tonight. Thank you for coming along. Communities are run by those who bother to turn up, and I think it's a powerful thing to have people to answer the call when we need you. The basic messages, I think, have been reiterated tonight and are clear throughout. Keep it green. Our vegetation and topography and landscape are important, and our tree canopy is absolutely vital to that. Make it strong. Use language that is clear and hopefully enforceable. If there is development, keep it appropriate and sympathetic to the area. I do note that there is some disappointment with some of the respondents that they didn't like their neighbourhood character type. They wanted an upgrade, basically, from whatever area they were in to move across the road. We can't change that. It's not a real estate document per se. It's trying to establish what we have in order to protect it. And I take Sue's comments about colour. I don't know if we can speak to the local paint manufacturers and get a permit system for anything called electric blue or Arctic white, but I'm sure we can talk to them. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. I'd just like to reiterate the gratitude I have for the people that are here in the chamber tonight for your words and for expressing your points of view on the document, and to the members of the community who put in their submissions. It is really important. This strategy is something that is particularly important to all of us as councillors. We've talked a lot about protecting where we live. We can't go back and change the last 20 years, but there are a number of people here in the audience today that have been talking about living here for 40 years and, you know, the changes that they've seen. So, you know, what's loud and clear from the community is making sure that we have a document that's strong enough so that we can protect what we've got, rather than finding, you know, that there are loopholes. So I really would like to say thank you for the emphasis on stronger words like should needs to be replaced with must, and those more powerful wordings in the document to make it enforceable at VCAT, because otherwise it really is a waste of everybody's time and we're going to be set up for disappointment. The comments about fencing, about colours, about being nestled into the landscape, no buildings on ridge lines, looking at co-housing, for example. Like, there are lots of ways that we can make this a fabulous place for our community, and this document is just one, as you have heard, about how does it link in. We are working on a biodiversity strategy this year, and we're also looking at a housing strategy, so we can't kind of do them all at once, unfortunately, but they will be referenced and working together when they are all put back out to the community. So please stay involved with what's happening here. I think that's all from me. So we'll look at the next stage, and hopefully the final document that comes back up to council has a number of the comments and opinions that you put forward, so that it is more reflective. I think everybody would like bush residential, and that's interesting that we've got people in the garden courts saying that's what I want to be. So I think that could be something for council, that we look at how do we work to make those other areas reflective of what was. If people are saying I want to be bush residential, it could be our street planting, but it also it's looking at what people are doing in their backyards. And I'm hearing very loud and clear about the bushfire BMO, bushfire management overlay, that does kind of play into the hands of developers and not so much into the hands of residents in those areas that want to kind of keep the smaller trees and bigger trees protected. They just seem to be going, so we want to see less of that. Thank you, that's all from me.
Thanks, Councillor Duffy. Any other councillors wishing to speak? Thank you, Mayor.
Look, I'd also like to thank all the speakers today. I think that was some really valuable input. I think the scope of the strategy does have to be clarified. These are very complex planning documents, and there are a number of constraints put on us by the state government in terms of what this document can and can't do. It cannot create permit triggers, so we can't stop people from doing things that they're already allowed to do without a permit. But what it can do is it can influence the way that we assess permits that are applied for under existing permit triggers. So while this document in particular can't necessarily force people to take out weeds or stop people from planting weeds that they're already allowed to plant, what it can do is it can push for more permeable space. So when you get a permit for a dwelling, you do have to have more permeable space on your land for trees to be planted. We could have stuff in there about encouraging indigenous and native vegetation, and then that could become part of permit conditions as a result. So it is quite high level. It can't be completely direct in what it says, and it can't force people to do things that they're not already required to do. So we are limited in terms of what we can do with it, but I think there was some really good input there, and it does sound like we need to make it stronger. I really take it on board about using the words should instead of must. Again, that is the nature of these documents. When you're talking about neighbourhood character, we can't make up a neighbourhood character. It has to be based on what's already there. And under state government policy, neighbourhood character does slowly creep over time and transform into something new. So what this strategy is about saying what is it that we value about that character, and how do we protect that and keep it the same for as long as possible. And any creep that does happen, how do we make sure it's appropriate and it creeps in the right direction? Because neighbourhood character will change over time, and unfortunately this strategy will never be able to stop that. But I think just in terms of some of the comments that were made that are outside the scope of the strategy, I think they really do reflect some of the work that we're already doing. In terms of weeds, our biodiversity strategy will hopefully be able to address that, and I'd really like to see us, once we've got that strategy done, have a much stronger approach to managing weeds on public and private land. We are working on an urban tree canopy strategy so that we can have more trees in urban areas and really encourage people not to cut down the trees that they've already got, and hopefully plant some more as well. So we are working on all these things. Not everything is in scope, but I think a lot of the contributions were really valuable, and thank you all for being here and for making them, and hopefully we'll be able to take all of that on board.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there any other councillors wanting to speak to this motion? I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. We do not have any supplementary and urgent business. There are no confidential reports. Therefore, I close the meeting at 8:02 p.m. Thank you to everyone for coming along and for watching.